Alright, good evening. I hope you got a chance to watch that other video, and I decided to make my first week's video tonight. If you watched the other video, the previous video on resolving, this video is directly related to that. I'm going to say that this concept and this device is basically one of the key elements I try to teach students and people because it crosses this boundary. If you watch the other video on resolving and understanding how to resolve back into the underlying chord, this basically is resolving it forward. Instead of resolving back to the underlying chord like we talked about in the last video, this is resolving forward, moving your progression forward. If you get into theory and you understand some of your theory, you're playing in key, tonal chords and things like that, this will be very helpful for you to get moving forward when you get writer's block, or you want to do something, you want to move out of key for a minute to try to color your creation or your improvisation a little bit differently. It's a really good device. And for those of you who don't understand tonal chords and don't understand playing in key really well, that this still can be a very useful tool when you're just jamming. When you're playing around, even if you know some 1-4-5s, like a major 1-4-5 or a minor 1-4-5 or something like that. And just to, reiterate that, major 1-4-5 or minor 1-4-5. I hope you understand that. If you don't, those are like the major of the first and fourth and fifth interval of a major scale, or if a minor scale, the first interval, the fourth interval, and fifth interval of the minor scale, playing in minor or major chords. That simple concept, and then going to like something like a pentatonic scale, can sometimes be very confining, to where people will play like some rock or some blues and they just get stagnant, like they're not going anywhere, and they just want something fresh to, liven up what they're doing, to get the fire and get the juices rolling again. That can be a very key thing. But for the most part, this device is basically designed to help you move forward. And whether or not you understand any theory about chord progressions and what chords you can play in any given key, that you can still use this. But it's designed, and reason why that I try to show it to people is most of the time it's for people who are composing or improvising that are feeling constrained by the constructs of theory. They want to kind of scoot out of it a little bit, get out of key for a minute to flavor things or spice things up or something like that. But it can also be to people that are a lot less advanced that know how to play a G chord or a G minor chord, that want to put a couple other chords together but don't really know where they should go. And without even knowing any theory, this device can help them to have fun. So no matter which side you're on or what developmental level you are at, that this is a really cool device, and it's one you should really take note of and put in your tool belt to really help yourself move forward. This is a huge thing that I feel that has helped so many students that I've talked to help get them out of ruts. When they get bored and they get into ruts and they're getting too confined, or everything's getting too clinical, that they can help them escape those ruts and those confines of theory. Or even, even more less advanced people who just know a few basic chords and they want to string a few chords together writing something, but they don't really know where to go. They don't really know, where can what chord should I play next? So I'm going to make this really simple, and I'm trying to make this concept so simple there's no way that you can confuse this concept. There's three ways. We'll look at it first. There's two different ways that you can move forward, or let's say three different ways. So the first way is you follow the tonal chords of where you can go theoretically in key. What would be the next chord? Like if you're playing in G major, you could play a G, and then you could play an A minor. That would be theoretically correct. You'd be in the key of G. Or, so you could play tonal chords that are in key to move your progression forward in composition or improvising. The next way is to search around for chords. You can just search around. You can go, okay, well, I'm playing a G, and I just, all of a sudden I'm up here for some reason, and I want to play this augmented chord. So you went from G to this augmented chord up here because it just kind of sounded good, and then you just kind of searched around blindly to find one. Those are two ways to do it. Now this device that I'm getting ready to show you, there's two ways to make this device work. And it's a huge tool, so you should practice it. It should be something you practice on a regular basis, moving around your fretboard with this, because it's very helpful. It's very helpful for you to understand your fretboard. It's very helpful to you to voice different chords in different positions, and very helpful in you moving forward, being really comfortable and just going somewhere else from one chord to somewhere else, quickly, the more that you practice it. And for those that you feel that you're at a lower level or beginners, it's a great device for you just to have fun, to help you put I'm playing a G and I'm going to play some other chord, and mess around until I find one that's cool. So here it is. There's two ways to do this device. The first way is very simple. We'll start out, let's say we've got a G, well, let's just go with a G major bar chord. So you've got a G major bar chord, and you want to know where to go from there. So really simply, to use any one of the tones or notes in this chord to be the leading tone going forward to somewhere else. Meaning the leading tone could be this third that's in that G bar chord, and using that as a leading tone that's going to move somewhere else. I slid it up just a half step up to this note here, which is the C. So I used one of the tones from that G chord as the leading tone to slide up, or I could have slid down to A here. Doesn't matter which way, up or down, some way. So I used that note as the leading tone, moved up, and then I'm going to form the next chord around that tone. So it could be in key, it could be that C. So it would go from that G major to that C, or I could do something different that would be out of key, that would be from that G major, using that tone as leading tone, sliding up to that C, and then forming a C minor around it. So it would go from G to C minor. Or you could go from that G, you could slide down to A, use that as the leading tone, sliding down to A, and you could make an A diminished. An A diminished would be, or A augmented. So basically an A augmented would be like something like that. So the simple concept is to use that tone as the leading tone. So I'd slide down to A and maybe do an A ninth. Form a chord around that note. A ninth would work. So it would be going G to A ninth. Does that make sense? And it's a really cool concept because you can use any one of the tones in that chord to be the leading tone. Like if I wanted to use this fifth right here, that is the D, and slide up to E. And I could go from G, use this tone as the leading tone that I'm listening to it, and you make augmented. So it'd be like G to that augmented E right there. Or I could have used it to go this as the leading tone, that tone in a chord to slide down to here. It would be to C. Or I could even go a half step and make it diminished. So it would be going like from G to C sharp diminished. Does that make sense? Because I used this tone from that chord to slide down a half step, and then I formed a diminished chord around that. And it doesn't matter which tone in the chord that note is. It can be any tone. You can make it a C major. You could make it an augmented. You could make it F sharp major. So you could go like from G major to F sharp major. Doesn't matter, just as long as that tone is in the next following chord. So use it as the leading tone to go to the next chord, sliding up or down. Any one of those tones in that chord. So you're going from G, using this tone in there to slide up and making a diminished chord or augmented chord. or a sus chord, or a sixth chord, or a seventh chord, or a ninth chord. Does that make sense? It's a really cool device to move you forward. That way you can start with any major or minor chord or any chord and use one of the tones from that chord as the leading tone that you're going to slide up or down somewhere else as the leading tone moving forward to the next chord, and then form the next chord around that tone. I hope that makes sense, because the next tone, whatever note from that chord you decide to use, you slide up or down, just has to be one of the tones in the next chord. So if I slid down to here, that it could be any chord that has that note in it. It could be F. So it could be like from G to F. Does that make sense? It just has to be one of the tones in the following chord. And it opens up worlds of possibilities when you get stuck, or you feel stagnant, or you've been practicing theory and you're, stuck in tonal chords or scales, or stuck in key, and you're like, I just feel stagnant. Or, blues players and rock players will get that way a lot. And sometimes when people are just starting out, that they just get stuck, and it's a really beautiful device to help you move forward, to help you do the next cool thing. It's like help you find another chord or the next chord and moving forward. And it's really intrinsically connected with the last video I did on resolve, because basically the last video was resolving your leads back to one of the tones of the underlying chord, where this is resolving forward, resolving to the next chord somehow. So it's a really cool device between the tone. I mean, it's something you just need to practice and keep in mind. Another way to use this device is to use one of the chord. You've got this G chord, and to use one of the tones as one of the tones in the next chord. So if I had this G, and I decide this fifth that is D is going to be one of the tones of the next chord. So I could go from G to D major, or D minor, or D augmented, or I could go D diminished, or I could go D sus. Does that make sense? So you can use one of those tones in that chord. It could be any chord. It could be like, let's say I've got a D diminished here. For some reason I've got this diminished chord, and I want to use one of the tones in for the next chord. So I could go like, one of the tones in that chord is this note right here. So I could use that for like augmented. I could use that as an augmented. And you'd have this diminished chord going to this augmented chord that used that tone in it. Which can be, you can come up with some really wild things happening. And you can start out with any chord and just use one of the tones of that chord as the leading tone, sliding, going, moving forward somewhere, up or down. Or use one of the tones in that chord to form a new chord. It's like any one of the tones, that third there. So you've got a B, right? So if you go from there, you got that G, and you go to like B minor. Sounds cool, huh? You got that G, and you use that third that's in the G chord to form a B minor, because that's one octave down is down there, right? So you got one octave down, form B minor. So you're going from that G to that B minor. Is that cool or what? It's a really cool device. It's immensely useful to beginners, intermediate, and advanced players to help them move forward. That way, that if you don't know any theory, that you've got all kinds of options in moving around and coming up with the next chord to get you moving forward so you don't get stuck and stagnant. And for intermediate and advanced players, it's a really cool concept if you understand some theory, so that when you're moving around, you start feeling stagnant, or you feel like it's just something's not jiving and it just doesn't feel good, and you're not finding that next chord that's going to be the cool next part of the song you're writing or improvising to, trying to write something for improvising to help it move forward. It's a huge device. It's something you should practice a lot. Two things about that. I'm not getting into chords a lot, but when you start doing that, it's going to force you to use your basic chords. Your basic chords are your major chord, your minor chord, your augmented chord, your diminished chord, and your sus chords. Those are the 5 basic chords. The other chords, the more advanced chords, are your major minor seventh, your major minor sixth, and your major minor ninths. After that, almost all other chords are built from those, either a combination of them or additions to them, notes that are added on to them. So you have to understand that those, if that concept I'll get into later, but that is a huge tool, and that tool you should practice a lot. With that last video, I was trying to show you how to resolve. Those two work together so well because this concept is helping you to resolve forward, to get you unstuck, to get you moving forward, and to open up all kinds of new possibilities to get your blood pumping and get you jazzed up, or find that next chord that sounds so cool that you were searching for. Does that make sense? And it also helps you to voice other chords, the basic chords that we just talked about, in different positions, and being able to go, okay, this note, I have to be able to form a diminished chord, and how many different diminished chords can I form from that note? How many different diminished chords? So it gets you thinking, right? Because how many different diminished chords have that note in it? So you've got different diminished chords, not just one diminished chord, not just this diminished chord, because that one has it in it. You also have this diminished, you have all kinds of diminished. How many different diminished chords do you have in it? I'm not going to get into it, but the understanding of that concept and what chords can go there. A sixth, a ninth. You've got what? You can play a ninth there. So you go from that G and use that note as a ninth. So you got that really cool flavor that's going from that G to that ninth or something like that. Or you can play an off the wall chord. And you got a really wild flavor that came off that just from that concept. And you'd be surprised that that sounds simple, like, you know, that's obvious, bro. But once you start using it and you start experimenting with it, the obvious becomes, it's like this tool. All of a sudden you realize that seems so obvious, but it's this huge tool. And I use either one of those ways, and it just opens up just a floodgate. It's like opening the floodgate of possibilities for the next chord. Does that make sense? And as you start to use that, all of a sudden you start finding these other chords that you didn't even know, and you're like, wow, I didn't know that would work together with that. So cool. And I also add this other note to it, and it's got this like cool flavor or something. And when I put that ninth there, but added this note, right? Added this 13th to it. And you get these really wild concoctions going on just from that one device. It's a huge tool. I'm trying to make theoretical concepts that are more helpful than clinical. Sometimes I'll get a little clinical, but I try to make them helpful stuff to help you move forward, to enjoy yourself, to get a fire in your butt, that makes you want to practice, that makes you want to pick up your guitar, and makes you want to practice on your own style, moving around the fretboard and experiment. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you make some notes about that device, pick up your guitar and do some playing. Peace out, love. See you in the next video.